the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, this opening music is growing on me. I'm starting to like it. Welcome everybody to Yaron Brook Show, and I hope you're having a great weekend. So today we're going to be joined by a couple of my my Patreon supporters, those who support me at some of the highest levels. We've got Jennifer and Glenn. Jennifer is in freezing Michigan. And Glenn is in probably mild Colorado, probably not too bad.
It's been cold lately, actually.
Okay. I was there just a couple of weeks ago. It was actually really, really nice. So
yeah.
All right. So we're going to take questions from Glenn and Jennifer. I've also got Patreon monthly contributor topics. I've got a bunch of questions there. And of course, we have the super chat. So we're going to kind of alternate between all of these and accept your questions. So if you're on Super Chat, prepare your questions. We will be taking them. And off we go. So Jennifer, you want to get us going with that first question?
Okay. I saw this on Facebook. I was going to ask you this. Some guy asked on Facebook about Mount Rushmore, about who you'd put up there, if it would even be presidents, or you would put different people up there.
Wow. If you're opening it up beyond presidents, then I would probably put, one or two of the founding fathers. Certainly, they should be up there. And then the question is, who else? And that's a hard one. Maybe a couple of the so-called robber barons. That would shake things up a little bit. So I'd have a greater tendency to put up business people than politicians. And the only politicians I would put up would be the founders, because I think that's such an impact. If it was presidents, then I'd put up more of the founders. So I'd put up, maybe Washington and Jefferson, and maybe, Adams wasn't that good of a president. So, and then I would put up, I don't know, Grover Cleveland and Calvin Coolidge or something like that. But I'm not an historian or an expert on American presidents. So I've heard people talk about how good Cleveland was, and I've heard people talk about how good Coolidge was. But in the ranking of presidents over 200 and something years, I don't have a good sense of who are the top four. I know who the bottom, well, even there it's hard. I know who the bottom six or seven or so on, because I used to have my bottom five, and then we got Obama, and then we got Trump, and it's like I have to expand it to my bottom seven because I haven't quite ranked the last two in the context of the history of it. But generally, I think that we place too much importance on politics, on generals, and politicians, and too little importance on the people who actually change the world, primarily businessmen and thinkers. And unfortunately, there are not that many other than Ayn Rand. There are not that many great American thinkers, and even Ayn Rand was an immigrant. But trying to think people who spent a significant part of their life in the United States and are significant thinkers who changed the world, there just aren't that many of them, in a positive way. Lots negative way. But in a positive way, there's just not that many of them that you would highlight in a way of putting up on Mount Rushmore.
I was thinking Madison for president.
Yeah, Madison could be a good one. Lincoln, obviously, for the Civil War that had to be fought and winning it. So I think Lincoln should be up there. It's hard, though. It's hard to rank them and to figure out. You'd really have to be an historian and really have an objectivist historian who had their perspective and historical perspective, who really had an impact, who had the positive impact, where did the impact last long term. So it's not I don't think it's easy to figure all that out. Somebody would have to do it, but that's just off the cuff.
Thank you.
And Madison would be there to a large extent because of the role he played in drafting the Constitution and the role he played in ultimately getting the Bill of Rights passed. And being and then of course there are objectivists out there who think that the best founding father was Hamilton. And I just saw the musical. So, but again, you'd have to be a serious historian to be able to really figure out all that and rank and do that kind of work. And somebody should do it. We need more historians. I think there's a lot of history that needs to be written from a objective perspective, from the perspective of human flourishing, from the perspective of human life. Glenn?
Yeah, this is, I think you probably have talked about this before, but, with all the controversy with China and everything, how concerned are you with the espionage aspect of that? What's the Telecom Hawaii? Is that the name of it? Where they're holding that person in Canada and all that? And it seems to be more than just Trump in the U.S. It seems to be a little, Canada and European countries are concerned as well.
I think everybody in the West is concerned, although the Canadians are holding her at the U.S.'s request. So this is not
right.
So now the Canadian legal system is going through the motions of, do we extradite her to the United States or not? And they're holding her for now, awaiting extradition. So I don't think Canada would have done it in and of itself. And the reason they're doing it is not so much the espionage aspect, is because of her company supposedly went around the sanctions on Iran and dealt with Iran, and that's why they're holding her. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be concerned about espionage, about the hacking, the stuff that the Chinese do, and of course the Russians do. I think those are the two primary countries from which most of the major hacking comes from. Both hacking of kind of military hacking of the Pentagon, but also hacking of trade secrets of businesses and corporations. And it is the job of the United States to protect our property rights, to protect us from that kind of hacking, and to protect us from certainly from state secrets being divulged to these countries. I'm not sure that means they should write the software. Thank God. No, they shouldn't write the software to actually do the protection, although the NSA is pretty good at that stuff. But I do think they need to retaliate, and they need to do the kind of things to make it clear to these countries that you don't steal stuff from Americans. And I think the primary way to do that is through, I'd say two ways. One is diplomatically. You first got to talk about it. You've got to make a big deal out of it. You got to do the kind of things that diplomatically you do, like bring back your ambassador and not invite the president of China to visit the United States, because as long as they're doing this, as long as they want to present themselves as an enemy to the U.S., which I don't think is how they want to present themselves, then we should, in a sense, treat them, at least to some extent, as that. And then, to the extent that we can stop it, to the extent that we can create, digital walls that prevent them from stealing stuff, then, to that extent, companies should do it. And to the extent that the U.S. government can do it, the U.S. government can do it, certainly for the Pentagon and places like that. The second way I would say is, the other way to deal with it is that if you can prove in a court of law that a particular product is based on stolen material, then you should ban the product from sale in the United States. Just like we ban, technically there's a ban on Louis Vuitton fake handbags being sold in the U.S. I'm sure some of them are sold in the U.S., but it's not a huge industry here. And the customs and people like that do what they can to stop fake handbags from coming into the U.S. You don't see that effort, for example, in Europe. In Europe, when you go in any European city on the streets, they're selling fake everything. You can find Louis Vuitton for $20 in the streets, probably from the same factory that Louis Vuitton is made, but these are fake. In the United States, we do that. So why not do it for high-tech products? Why not do it for everything? That is, if China is producing something, and why not encourage our allies to not allow those goods into their countries and really use that? Not, I'm very much against tariffs. I'm very much against using trade as a means, but we don't trade in stolen products. That's not new. That's not just, let's expand that beyond where people lobby like Louis Vuitton to, intellectual property rights where people maybe are not as lobbying quite as hard, but where it's still the role of government to protect property rights. So I think those are the main ways you do it. Espionage is always around. It's always happened. It's always goes on. We hack them. We have spies over there. They have spies over here. Not to make them all equivalents, but it's happening all the time. Happened during the Cold War. And you deal with it by stopping it, by finding ways to stop it, catching their spies, prosecuting their spies, and prosecuting their hackers. For example, if we know the particular Chinese companies involved in this hacking, or particularly Chinese individuals involved in some of this, put out arrest warrants on them, make it very hard for them to travel around the world, make it very hard for them to deal with other countries, to make any money through trade, because they are now persona non grata. So I think we have tools to do that. Is it a national security threat to the extent that I think, I don't know, we should go to war over it? No. Is it a threat to the extent that I think that China is going to, because of this, become a military threat to the United States? No. I think it's still relatively the kind of espionage that happens all the time. Just now, a lot of it's electronic.
Right. What's the balance between, how much is the responsibility of individual companies to, they know they're going over there and there's a risk, right? Or they're dealing with these Chinese companies, and there's a risk that they're taking that on voluntarily, right?
Yeah, so I think some of it's the responsibility of these companies, and they know what they're doing, and it's known. But it's still, stealing is still wrong. That is, in the United States government, it's still a job. Now, if the company says, look, don't bother, we know they're taking it, we don't care, then fine. Then maybe the U.S. doesn't do anything about it, doesn't exert any effort. But if the company still wants the U.S. government to deal with it, then the U.S. government should.
Yeah.
So, we all travel to these countries and knowing the risk, but look, I've always said there are three kind of countries that the United States should categorize. They're basically friendly countries, free countries where it says, go do business. We'll work with these countries to protect your property rights. If you go over there and something happens, our embassy will help you, and we'll really put in. And generally, these are countries where we support your engagement with them. And then there's a category of countries where don't do anything with them. These are enemy countries. We ban you from going, like the North Korea, the Iran, embargoes. We don't have anything to do with them. They're the enemy, right? Maybe Saudi Arabia should be it. And then there's a third category of countries where, look, these are bad countries generally. Property rights are not protected. You can go. We'll help you, but beware, right? Beware. And we're not going to go to war over this. So just, we'll do what we can, but we can't do a lot because these are not rights respecting countries, and they probably don't think of what we care that much. So just beware. And our diplomatic relations with these countries are minimal, and beware. Now, where does China fall into that? Somewhere between those two categories. I don't think it's an enemy country. I think it's somewhere between, maybe used to be more friendly and now more hostile. And should we have an ambassador in China? I still think we should. I don't think we should have an ambassador in every country that we do. I think there are plenty of countries where we shouldn't have had an ambassador. We shouldn't sanction the regime. And maybe even in China, we shouldn't, particularly with Xi turning this and becoming more and more authoritarian, more and more anti-American. Okay. All right, and I'm going to take one of the Patreon monthly contributor questions. And Nathan Smith asks, you have said that Ayn Rand is a once a millennium thinker. Who else would you put on that list and why? So, again, this is a tough question because you need to know a lot of history, and you need to know a lot of intellectual history, and you need to know. But I think that there are probably a number of those kind of thinkers that I can name. I'd say Plato and Aristotle, probably Thomas Aquinas, and Immanuel Kant. And then it's hard, and then you'd have to go to science. You'd have to say Newton, I don't know. You'd have to be a philosopher of science and know a lot more science than I do if Einstein fits there, but maybe, I don't know. But certainly Newton. And in arts, you would have to, there are probably some Greeks, there's probably Michelangelo, there's probably Leonardo, there's probably a handful of others, but they're very few. So, but in terms of all-encompassing thinker, somebody who impacts and you know, a broad, in philosophy, let's say, where you have a broad cultural impact, I think ultimately Ayn Rand will be one of those figures. All right, let's take one of the super chats. Jason asks, will anti-Semitism reach never before levels seen in America? Will there be pogroms in this country? I mean, I don't think so, but, you know, I don't know. It's not like the United States didn't have lynchings. It did. It has had somewhat equivalent to pogroms, and not that long ago, you know, lynchings were happening in the South in the 40s and 50s and into a little bit into the 60s. So I guess it's possible. I don't see it right now. I do see a rise in anti-Semitism. I do think it's going to get worse. If things don't get better, then yes, the more tribalistic we become, the more tribal the culture becomes, the more, you know, racist the country becomes, both on the left and on the right, the more likely it is that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and you get more attacks like the attack on the synagogue, or you get more, you know, pogroms are a feature of the past, but you get more violence against Jews, and certainly various forms of discrimination against Jews. I think it's on the rise today, but I still think it's minor, certainly as compared to Europe, and certainly as compared to the Muslim world. But it is on the rise, and it is something to watch. And the whole tribalism phenomena, it's hard to tell where that takes us. I mean, who knows? It's uncharted waters to a large extent for the United States. I mean, even the racism of the past was not motivated, was not quite as, I don't know, doesn't strike me as quite as tribal as where I think we might be heading, where it's little groups, it's lots of little groups, it's, you know, and where everybody, it's a war of everybody against everybody. So, but that's what Ayn Rand always predicted. She always predicted that a mixed economy, and given the morality and the philosophy of the culture, we're heading towards balkanization. We're heading towards a war of everybody against everybody, a war of pressure groups, a war of tribes. That's depressing. Jennifer.
What exactly do you think would constitute inciting violence? Like if I said, oh, I hate that guy, I wish you would kill him, and then somebody does, how responsible would I be?
Well, if you literally say, I wish you would kill him, and in other words, the person hearing you has reason to believe you meant it. That is, that it's not like a joke. It's not like you're not, I don't know, drunk or something. But you know, you might be angry, but there's reason to believe the person. Then yeah, you have culpability. You don't have the same culpability as the person who pulls the trigger, but you certainly have culpability in the murder. So I think that an incitement, and I'm not an expert on this. You'd have to ask like Tara Smith, who's done some work on. She's actually got an article out now. I haven't read it, but she's got an article on when does speech become action. So when does speech become violence? And I assume there's a section there on incitement and what incitement actually means. So maybe next time we have Tara on, we can ask the question, or I can find the article and post it if it's online somewhere. But I think it has to be pretty explicit, and it has to be done in a context where the assumption is you're serious. You know, go kill all those Jews. If you're saying it in a mosque or in a church or something where we're in front of a congregation that's pretty militant, yeah, that's incitement, and that should be prosecuted. And you should have culpability if they actually act on it. If you're a mafia don and you say, yeah, I want those people killed, well, of course, you have major responsibility. If you're an angry spouse, and wasn't there a movie where the two spouses agree to kill each other's spouses, and it's a comedy, and it turns out, you know, and you say, you know, would you kill my whatever? Yes, I mean, it's all degrees, Because if I'm paying you to do it, obviously I'm fully responsible. It's as if I pulled the trigger. If I'm encouraging you, if I'm really inciting you, if I'm working on you, if I'm, day and night, like maybe at a mosque or something where they're really encouraging people to go out and go to jihad, then you're fully culpable. And if you say go kill him, kind of a half-assed comment, I think you're somewhat culpable. But how much? It depends on the context and depends on exactly what's going on.
What if you're in the street and you see someone getting attacked? You don't help them. Maybe you're afraid, or you don't have to help them, I guess, but you should call the police. Like, what if you don't call the police? Is that an accomplice in a sense, or not really?
I think if you don't call the police, then I think it's some kind of violation. I don't think you would be accused of murder or anything like that, but I think that it's, you do have, I think, a legal responsibility in the face of a crime to call the police. And exactly how you would define that legal responsibility and what would be the penalties for such a legal responsibility, I don't know. You certainly don't have a responsibility to go out and help, to risk your life to help somebody. I don't think you have a legal responsibility or moral responsibility necessarily, but I do think calling the police is probably a legal responsibility. And I think it's recognized today, even in the law. And I think rightly. So for example, let's say you have material evidence against somebody and you don't bring it forward, right? That is, I think, a misdemeanor or crime or something like that. So it's which is even less than you're witnessing a crime and you're not calling the police. Glenn?
I don't know if you last week on 60 Minutes, they interviewed this Chinese, I forget his name, Kuo. He's a big AI guy. He's been doing TED Talks and everything. Really interesting guy, very enthusiastic. He's worked in Silicon Valley and all that. And he's basically saying the Chinese are catching up in AI and all that. And one thing that struck me, I was interested in your perspective, is that, in China, they seem far less concerned about privacy and protection and all that compared to, what we're going through here, going after Facebook and Google and everything. And, and how that could impact, aside from, what the Chinese government, what support the companies are getting, and which doesn't seem to be that much right now, but it's hard to tell. But just on the, different perspectives on privacy in the two countries, and is that a concern for the development of, what seems to be a cutting edge technology right now going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think privacy is not that big of a concern in China for a number of reasons. I think the main one is they've come out of communism where there was zero privacy, right? And even in the raw sense of you lived with your family in one big room, there wasn't enough wealth for walls, never mind, everything was done. It was like the West when we were really, really poor. I think it was probably not a lot of concern of privacy in the 19th century. And we build that concern. I think Ayn Rand describes it as you move towards civilization, you become more and more concerned with privacy. In a sense, the move towards civilization is represented by a concern for privacy. So I think Chinese are probably more concerned with privacy now than they were 30 years ago, but not as concerned as we are, because they're still too close to the point where there was no privacy in their world, and they're just enjoying already what they have. Also, the government is not allowing them for much privacy. So one of the things that the Chinese have adopted now is this idea of a social score. I don't know if you've read about this.
No.
Basically, what the Chinese government is doing is it's trying to assemble information about every single one of its citizens, from your social media activity, from everything else that you do, including they now have blanketed the country. I assume it's only in the big cities, but they're trying to blanket the country with cameras. And the cameras have very sophisticated facial recognition software. So they can even tell where you're going, what you're doing. Are you behaving selfishly? Are you cheating on your wife? Are you, engaged in political activity that is not socially acceptable or whatever. And you get a score. You get a score in this computer model. This is the AI model. You get a score for how socially good you are. And that score will not only be used for the government to decide on the way in which the government would treat you, but it'll also be shared with, for example, banks to decide whether you can get a mortgage or not, or another. So the government is going to decide if you're a good person or not. And of course, the standard is pure collectivism. The standard is pure statism. And they're going to share that information with private companies, and it's going to impact the individual's life significantly. Now, this is 1984, almost on steroids. I mean, this is it coming true in a way that we couldn't imagine, because China has now the technology to do it. Now, so when you say they're developing AI, is that private companies in China?
It seems like some of them, yeah. I mean, that's what it was interesting in the 60 Minutes interview. He was working with private companies, and they talked about the facial recognition and how that's developing. When they asked him about how the government's involved, he got very quiet, because you could tell he was not comfortable saying anything bad about the Chinese government.
No, but it's also true that for the facial recognition technology, the Chinese have purchased a lot of technology from the US. There's actually been some stories about that, and about whether American companies should be selling that technology to the Chinese because of how it's being used by the government. I can't prove this, but I would bet a lot on the fact that they're getting a lot of technology from Israel. Israel's very good at things like facial recognition, spatial recognition, a lot of the self-driving car technology that has to do with identifying, computers seeing in quotes, but the computer identifying their environment. Most of that technology, the cutting edge technology for that, is coming out of Israel. From what I hear, Tesla is actually falling behind on that because they adopted a previous generation technology and they're not able to catch up. And the cutting edge stuff is coming from Israel. And my guess is Israel is willing to buy friends by selling technology and weapons. Now, I do not have any firsthand information, so this is not any Israeli state secret. This is just my suspicion that they are probably selling the Chinese some of the AI-driven technology that makes this possible. Now, that is not to discount the fact that the Chinese tech companies are cutting edge. A lot of them are real innovators. I forget the name of the Facebook equivalent in China, but
WeChat or something.
Yeah, something like WeChat. The WeChat is way ahead of anything we do here, and it's fully integrated. It's like Facebook, Twitter, eBay, PayPal, because they have a payment mechanism all built into one. And they're far more sophisticated than we are when it comes to some of these things. We know that in other technologies they're advancing. And the reason is that to a large extent they've been left free. That is, we know that the mind does not function well under force. And the Chinese government has left a lot of these tech companies alone. They take their technology, they use their technology for bad means, but they haven't tried to guide the development of that technology, and they haven't taken the profits away. They haven't taken the motivation away. Not yet, anyway. We'll see with this president how things develop. But so far, they've left these companies alone. So when you free up the mind, and we know the Chinese have a culture of entrepreneurship. We know the Chinese have a lot of very smart people who do very well. They've done well in the US when they've come here. They do well anywhere they go in the world. And I'm not surprised that they're doing well in China itself. I'm not worried in a sense of, if they take over, who cares, right? In the sense of they develop it faster than we do. And if it's private, I don't care. My fear is that the government is using all these technologies primarily against their own citizens. And that's what's scary. But I also think that as the government becomes more oppressive, as the government becomes more controlling, as the government becomes more authoritarian, I think they will lose their edge, right? So it's kind of a self-correcting mechanism. that a lot of the best scientists will leave, a lot of the best AI people will leave and they're still allowed to leave. You can leave China, you can come and work in the US. A lot of them will do that. They'll go elsewhere in the world. And as the Chinese government starts guiding the development of these things more and more, we know what happens. We know, again, the use of force, how that diverts it. It's why the US could build an atomic bomb faster, I think, than the Nazis, and why, even though there were rumors constantly that the Russians were way ahead of us technologically, they never really were. They got Sputnik, and that was it, right? And after that, they couldn't really match anything we did, maybe except chess, right? Scientifically, and it was even rumors in the 70s that the Soviet economy was going dramatically faster than the US economy, right? Which all turned out, and this was the CIA. This is why I'm always skeptical of anything the CIA produces in terms of, white papers and stuff like that, because these guys blew it on such a grand scale with the Soviet Union. Why would we think they'd get it right today?
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think you're going to see a lot of exciting technology ultimately come from China, because I don't think they're like even the Japanese. I think there's something about Chinese culture that is more entrepreneurial, more thinking out of the box, less conventional, less conformist. I think Japanese culture traditionally has been more conformist, less thinking out of the box. The educational institution in Japan are much more driven towards conformity. I think China is much more about letting individuals think for themselves, unless you get into politics. And then what's also interesting, and I'm hoping to have a guest on the show one of these days who'll talk about this, is the degree to which China right now is interested in Montessori education. There's a massive interest right now in China in Montessori. The Chinese middle class, there's huge growth in Montessori schools and in Montessori education in China. And that is a very positive for the future of China, because at some point they won't be able to contain their people. At some point, people don't want to have a social score, won't want to be watched. At some point, people will rebel against the invasion of privacy, and I think China will. I'm hoping China will become a freer country ultimately because of all that. All right, let's take one of the Patreon questions. What is a nation's obligation on controlling its borders? Does the limited immigration allow the moral culture of a country to be overwhelmed? I'm gonna add to this a question that I got also two different people, but also regarding immigration. Might as well cover them all. You've said the government ought to prevent violent criminals from entering its border. What precisely is a violent criminal? How does the government have the right to prevent violent criminals from entering a country, but not have the right to prevent them from moving from state to state or city to city? Is there an inconsistency here? Could the same be said of those with diseases? Why does the government have a right to prevent somebody with a disease to move to New York if that person is coming from outside the country, but not to prevent that travel if he's coming from within the country? All right, so this is one question is from the Harry Binswanger school of thought, where traveling across country lines should be just like crossing state lines. And the other one is coming from a more cynical perspective on immigration. Let me try quickly, because I've done whole shows on these issues, quickly to answer both these questions. I think a country's obligation in controlling its borders is the country's obligation in doing everything it does. The country, and I mean the nation, and I assume here one means by the nation, the government's responsibility in controlling its borders is the same as the government's responsibility in controlling anything. That is, its only responsibility is the protection of individual rights. So a nation should control its borders to the extent that controlling its borders is consistent with the protection of individual rights. And what is that? That means controlling its borders to prevent those entering who might pose a risk, a danger to people within the country. So those who might violate or are highly likely to violate or have the intention to violate the rights of those within the country. And that's it. So you ask about the moral culture. So first, unlimited immigration. I don't know what unlimited immigration means. I've talked about mass migration, and I'm opposed to mass migration. And I think mass migration, almost by definition, violates property rights of individual, like millions of people just crossing the border, uncontrolled, like they did in Europe a few years ago. That I think migration has to be limited and controlled, but open in a sense that anybody should be able to allowed in as long as they're not coming in with millions of people at the same time. It has to be controlled in some sense. Otherwise, rights are being violated. But let's say just a lot of people coming. What about the moral culture of a country? Let's put this as straightforward as I can. It's not the government's job to be concerned about the moral culture of the country, thank God. I mean, that's how we got prohibition. That's how we got the drug war. That's how we got 90% of the stupid laws that we have on the books, is because the government is concerned about the moral culture of the country, and they want to legally manipulate us into moral behavior, what they see as moral behavior. No, the job of the government is to protect individual rights, period. That's it. And individual rights are now violated by the fact that my neighbor has bad morals. Now, if those morals manifest in behavior that his rights violating, put him in jail. But if he sits around drinking all day and watching television, which I consider immoral activity, immoral life, it's not my business, not the government's business. If I won't give a second example because I'd get into trouble on that. So the government's job is not, just imagine, I mean, the government has perceived itself as a moral agent. And look at the mess we're in today. I mean, redistribution is not done because it's good economics. It's done for moral reasons. I don't want the government to be involved in the culture of a country. I don't want the government to define the culture. I mean, think of what a mess that would be. Think of the mess we have today because of the government actually doing that. Now, what would happen to the moral culture of a country? Well, look at what happened in the 19th century. The people who come in adopt the culture of the country because it's a good culture. It's why they come here. It's why they're motivated to come. Particularly when you don't have welfare, why else would they show up? If you don't have welfare and they can't take advantage of other people, and they're going to be put in jail if they bring with them the barbaric behaviors that are rights violating, then they or their children will assimilate. And if our culture is a confident culture, a culture that is clearly defines itself and argues for itself and doesn't buy into the multiculturalist bullshit that exists out there, then we tell them our culture is superior, we expect you to assimilate, then they will assimilate. They will assimilate into our world. So I see no problem in that. Okay, let me take this one. Let me just say, Nathan, who's asking about what is a violent criminal and so on, that these are the kind of issues that will have to be worked out. I don't have an answer to this, and it doesn't worry me that I don't have an answer to this. These are kind of, what is exactly a violent crime? What kind of violent crime? How do you know they have a violent crime? What if they've served their sentence? Well, depends, I guess, on the violent crime. You would have to have legal scholars sit down and write the laws that define exactly what all of that constitutes. But this is why I think there's a difference between a national border and a state border. One of the things the national government does, which a lot of those who believe in federalism might shudder at this, but one of the things I think that the federal government does is make sure that state governments have laws that are consistent with the protection of individual rights. So state governments might have different laws. They might have different sentencing guidelines. They might have particular definitions of fraud that are a little bit different. There might be things that happen that are different between states. But they have to be broadly consistent with the protection of individual rights. Otherwise, the Supreme Court, through the federal government, should rule them unconstitutional. This is why slavery was an abomination and had to go, even though the states voted for it. It was anti-individual rights, and therefore it was the federal government's job to eliminate slavery. And if the federal government can identify clear violations of individual rights in state law, they should eliminate them. We have no control over the laws of other countries. We cannot judge, and it's not the job of our government to judge whether the laws of other countries, people are fully punished, people were punished appropriately, inappropriately. You have to make an assessment of the risk posed by somebody coming into the country. And if you've been a criminal, a violent criminal, in any kind of way, in my view, if you've committed robbery, the fact that the legal system of another country has penalized you should not affect the determination that you pose a risk. And there are going to be errors here, but don't commit crimes. That's my recommendation generally. And if you're a foreigner who has an incentive to come one day to the United States, don't commit a crime. Because if you commit a crime, in my world at least, you would not let in because the probability that you will actually repeat is very high. And I cannot vouch for your laws, and I cannot vouch for what happens. And it might be that you could have even stricter laws than that. I don't know exactly what the criteria will be for who's not allowed in. Somebody has to do the real thinking. Somebody has to figure it out. I don't have to worry about it now because our laws are so stupid now in terms of immigration that all I'm suggesting is the direction in which we should be moving towards. The same with diseases. It is true that within the United States, we have the Center for Disease Control, I think it's called. And I think in a rational country, you would still have a Center for Disease Control. If there's an outbreak of measles right now in Washington, and measles is a very dangerous disease, then it is appropriate for the federal government to step in and say, okay, we need to quarantine these people. We need to watch where somebody who's been exposed to this travels. Let's say there was a breakout of Ebola, right? Something really bad. Then yeah, you might have constraints. You might have temporary restrictions between states, even within the United States, where you monitored people because it's such a deadly disease and it's so dangerous. And you want to quarantine the people who have it very, very quickly. Again, when you have no control over what's happening in another country, and when there's reason to believe that in other countries there are issues related to diseases, and that you don't know where these people are coming from. Let's say they're crossing the Canadian border, but they could have just flown in from Africa, where there's an Ebola outbreak right now, whatever, right? Where there is right now an Ebola outbreak, unfortunately. A quick screening to make sure they don't have a fever, a quick screening to check them, I think is completely within the purview of the government. Again, think about if you walk into a hospital in Washington and you've got measles, that information is reported to a central database that tracks these things, and justifiably so, because a disease like that is a threat to other people within your community. And the government is involved in that. And so I don't think it's the same when people come from outside of the country, because within the country, you have a certain control over the standards, over the laws, over the measures taken, over the legal system. You do not have that outside of the US. And there has to be some way to tell that there is that people coming in are not posing a real threat. From state to state, what is a protection is the laws of that state which are protecting you. That guy should have been caught, right? If they committed a crime. We can't tell in another country. And we have a lot of intelligence about people who commit crimes in other countries that are not prosecuted in other countries. Terrorists, for example. Screen them for terrorist activity. Now, in a world where there's no terrorism, in a world where all the countries basically have good legal systems and all countries basically protect individual rights, yeah, I don't believe there should be any screening at the border. How about that, right? In Europe right now, where you have basically a European Union that has common laws, very similar legal systems, where the standards for who comes in from externally are about the same. There's no screening. You just drive across the borders. It's fantastic. I love I love that fact about Europe, that you can drive from pretty much any country to any country and there's no border. You can't even tell there's a border. I think that's a great thing if you have that common system. All right. Quick super chat question. I don't even know how to answer this. How do you not get sick all the time? A chaotic schedule. When my sleep schedule is off, I always get sick. I get sick if I don't sleep enough. So I try to make sure when I travel to sleep as much as I can. I now take melatonin quite a bit when I travel to knock me out, to make sure that I sleep. I still don't sleep periodically. I do what I can to boost my immune system. I take some vitamins, but I don't know. The bottom line is I try to take care of myself. I exercise, I eat well, I take some vitamins, I try to sleep when I'm home, I try to sleep on the road. I try to stay warm when I'm in cold countries, although that's impossible in some of these crazy places like Michigan and Colorado. But I'm going to St. Peter's. Now the real test is going to be this February when I go in just a week. I leave. Leaving in a week. I'll be in London and then in St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg in February should be a lot of fun. Stockholm in February, and then back to London, and back to Oxford actually, and then to Prague. So that trip should be a test of my immune system. We'll see how I do. But sleep is a big factor. All right, Jennifer.
Have you ever noticed when people engage in behavior that other people don't like drugs or abortion or something like that, they always go after the drug seller, the abortion doctor, not the person who's buying it as much? Do you think it's because that's the person making the money?
I think it's partially the person making the money. I also think it's not the person who is in need. So it's altruism, right? So you feel sorry for the drug user. You feel sorry for the teenage girl who's pregnant. The people who you feel sorry for, you don't hold to high moral standards because the meek shall inherit the earth. I mean, they're just you can't expect teenagers to be held to a high moral standard. You can't expect people who need drugs to be held, but the doctor, he's an upstanding citizen. He's got money. He's, you can go after. So it's partially but it's all driven by altruism, right? It's money, it's anti-money, and it's anti the most successful of the two parties, right? You're never going to see the culture condemn those who are suffering. Those who are suffering get elevated morally somehow, right? Christianity elevates them immediately to a position that is beyond criticism. Glenn?
I was trying to think of something positive, but what the hell? So the Democrats are starting to come out for the presidential, starting to announce. It's looking depressing. Any thoughts on the current batch of people and chances against our favorite president right now? And
yeah, I mean, I think the current batch, I mean, partially it's who's announced. So I think what's happened is the people who are basically competing with Bernie Sanders have announced early. And part of that, I think, is to pressure him not to run. So, I mean, what is the big differences between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders? Not many on policy issues, although she presents herself as a savior of capitalism, and he is honest enough at least to say he's not a capitalist. She is so dishonest. I mean, this woman is so frigging smart. She's really, really, really dangerous, much more than any of the others. So for me, she's the worst and the most dangerous of all of them. I'd rather have Bernie Sanders than her. Mm-hmm. And she can manipulate Republicans. She knows if she ever became president, we're in deep, deep, deep trouble. Who else is running? We've got Kamala Harris. We'll see how long her campaign survives. There was just a story today, this morning, that Kamala Harris had an affair with Willie Brown.
Yes.
So it's pretty funny. Willie Brown was 30 years older than her, and Willie Brown basically said, and Willie Brown was married, but my understanding is his wife didn't care, so he would often show up at parties with his wife on one hand and one of his mistresses on another. But Willie Willie admits in the op-ed he published today in the San Francisco Chronicle that he helped her in her career while she was sleeping with him. That is, he got her all these jobs when she was
Right.
very young.
Yeah.
Who knows how that's going to play? Willie Brown's a character. Who knows how that's going to play for her? But she is probably the least lefty of all of them, which is kind of scary because she's pretty left. She is, of the ones announced, of the big names announced so far, she's probably the most reasonable. Who is the other? Oh, Gillibrand in New York is announced. She's pretty left, but not as bad as Elizabeth Warren. But she's also, I think, going after some of the Bernie Sanders vote. But I don't think she has much of a chance. And then I'm trying to think.
There's
Who
that
else?
guy.
You know,
There's that-
Antonio.
right.
I don't know much about him. I'm actually going to look at him because he, for all we know, he might be pretty reasonable on some issues because he is from Texas, and you can be a completely nutty lefty, although Beto was, but you can't. I don't think you can be a completely nutty lefty in San Antonio. You have to be Hispanic, but I don't think you have to be a complete nutty lefty. So we'll see how crazy lefty he is. Who else?
I don't know. There was that guy who seemed pretty. I can't remember his name. It's kind of an odd name.
Is it Beto? Beto ORourke?
Yeah.
Okay, he hasn't announced yet, so he might be announcing soon, but he hasn't announced yet. He just turned me down for a debate. So we're going through a list of Democrats to try to find me a debate partner. We've been turned down now by a very impressive list. Bernie Sanders turned me down. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has turned me down. And Beto has turned me down. So I think we're shifting away from politicians and now moving towards, hopefully, public intellectuals who will accept, who will agree to debate.
Good.
Yeah, so Beto, I don't know that much about him. Again, I don't think he can run as a Bernie Sanders. I think he has to run more to the center. I think when he ran in Texas, he ran more to the center, although he's still quite left. I'd have to look at his positions on things and look at him to see. And then I think you're going to get, and then it's going to be interesting to see who else runs within the Democratic Party. Biden will probably run, and he's certainly a more centrist politician. He's also an idiot, I think, but he's certainly more of a centrist politician. I just don't think he can win. I don't think he can win a primary. I don't think he can win an election. And
Do
I don't know.
you think the Democratic Party, so more broadly, do you think they're going to go far left in this election? Or do you think they're going to stay with kind of the Hillary axis, even despite the last election?
Just think Hillary's not far left.
That's sad. It's scary to admit that, but yes.
I don't know. I think it's going to be a really interesting, like the Republican primary is always really interesting. Is it going to be the evangelical who set the tone, or is it going to be the
Right?
And it's going to be interesting now as well with the Democrats. Is it going to be the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who sets the tone, or is it going to be the more so-called moderate voices that set the tone? And it's really hard to tell. I think if they want to beat Trump, I think they're going to have to go with the more moderate voices. But I don't know. I also think that Bernie might be able to beat Trump because I think he could get some Trump voters to vote for him. So
he probably would have won the last time if it hadn't been Hillary. Yeah,
I think he probably would have excited the base much more than Hillary did on the Democratic side, and peeled off some of Trump voters and got them.
Mm-hmm.
You've still got what's his name, Booker.
Cory Booker. Yeah.
Cory Booker, who's quite charismatic. The former mayor of Newark, who's black. So you're going to get all the minorities running on the Democratic side. And one of the lessons from Clinton is she didn't get the black vote. She didn't get them out. She won it overwhelmingly, but they didn't come out for her like they did for Obama. So she lost in Michigan because they didn't come in Detroit. She lost in Pennsylvania because they didn't come out in Philadelphia. So she didn't get the numbers in terms of the black vote. So they're really going to go and get somebody who can try to get somebody who can bring out the black vote. But then there's another possibility, which is, I think, going to be really interesting, and that is, do we get a third candidate? And do we get a kind of credible third candidate like Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, or like Howard Schultz, the former CEO and current chairman of Starbucks, right, who is contemplating a run for president as an independent or as a Democrat? Either one of those might win the Democratic primary, although I think they're worried about losing it, and that's why they're thinking of independent runs. I don't think Mark Cuban is going to run, but Mark Cuban could run. Those I think would be, now it's really interesting because I think any one of those beats Trump, right? So I think a Bloomberg or a Howard Schultz from Starbucks. I don't know about Cuban. Cuban's a little nuts, but I think those two, I think certainly Bloomberg, who's run a political campaign in New York City, I think can win because I think they get the whole center. They just dominate the center. And then I think they get the left because they won't vote for Trump. So I think Schultz or Bloomberg win against a Trump. I think it's wide open. And look, Trump destroyed himself yesterday or whenever it was, where he gave up on the government closure, where he capitulated. I mean, he really destroyed himself when he started the government closure. I mean, he had a Republican House of Representatives for 2 years, and they never passed a budget with a wall. And he expects the Democrats to do it. I mean, it's just political stupidity to demand that, and then to shut down the government over it, and then to capitulate over it. You know, he just looks like the idiot he is, and he looks like he looks bad to his base for the first time. I think the base will now question him. Mm-hmm. So he's very vulnerable. But to whom, I don't know. It's a real mess. All right, here's a question from Matthew. On page 224 in Opal, Leonard states, quote, since neither God nor society can perform a miracle, the policy of Christian hope is the opposite of virtue. How is that usage of the concept hope different from when one says, I hope you have a good day, or something like that? So I think it's very different, right? I think the idea of Christian hope is it's just going to happen. Good stuff is going to happen. Because I pray, because Jesus is on my side, because God is good. And I hope for good stuff to happen for those pseudo reasons, for those mystical reasons. When I say to somebody, I hope you have a good day, that's just being benevolent. That's just, hope today, hope in the context of, I expect, I wish upon you that the day goes well, right? It's not that I'm mystically expecting something positive to happen, right? It's not that I'm praying. It's not that and at the end of the day, if you're saying, I hope you have a good day, you are implicitly saying, at least if you refer to yourself, I hope I have a good day, you're saying, and I'm going to do the things necessary to make it a good day, right? That it's up to me to make it a good day. Yeah, there's bad stuff that can happen, but generally it's up to me to take responsibility. So I think, there's a sense in which one should not use the word hope because it's so anchored in that Christian tradition. It's so anchored in faith as a primary. And I don't use the word faith even in contexts where I don't have faith that the person will do the right thing. I don't have faith in other human beings. I trust and I don't trust. I generally have a benevolent view of other people, but I wouldn't call it faith because I consider that opinion about other people, it's something based on facts. You could argue that we shouldn't use hope at all, and you should say, have a good day, skip the hope word. But I think there's a sense in which you could use it in two different ways. One is a more casual, I expect that if you do the right things, good stuff will happen to you. And the sense in which, you know, I'm basing my expectation of the future on a mystical element, which is captured by the word hope. All right. Avid film buff asked me a question I cannot answer because I don't know who you're talking about. So I read somewhere that Ayn Rand and Gene Roddenberry were fans of each other's work. Is there any truth in that? I don't know. Who's Gene Roddenberry?
Star Trek.
Star Trek.
Star Trek.
He
So I
wrote.
don't know if they were fond of each other's work. Do you know, Glenn? Do you know?
No, I haven't heard that.
I can ask and see if I can get an answer on that, but don't know. Okay, what do we have here? Okay, Jennifer.
Do you think a man is responsible for paying for an illegitimate child he didn't want?
Not as long as not as long as abortion is legal, right? So and not as long as he will support the woman in having an abortion. I think he should pay for the abortion or co-pay for the abortion. But if he's offering that option to the woman and she says, no, I'm going to have this child, and he says to her, I'm not going to pay anything for that child, then no, I don't think he should be responsible.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That's one of the reasons I think abortion is important. You got to give people as many outs as possible from having kids, because having kids is such a huge responsibility. And putting them up on abortion is not good enough, right? Because even putting it up on abortion is a huge responsibility. You know, you can't just, oh, well, the government will take care of that or whatever, or that agency will take care of it. You brought the child into the world. You have responsibilities. And you better make sure that you're equipped, ready, able, and willing and wanting to bring this child into the world. And if there's any doubt, don't bring the child into the world. And in that sense, I always say I'm pro-abortion. I don't couch this in pro-choice. Abortion's not a good thing, but yeah, you have to have it. No, abortion's a good thing. Now I'm going to get slammed. I just lost 1,000 subscribers to my YouTube channel, but so be it. All right, Glenn.
Any new TV shows or movies you've seen?
Well, I don't know. Did I talk about Miss Mabel?
I don't know if you did. Yeah, I started watching that. That's fun.
I really enjoyed that. So I watched both seasons of that.
Wow.
The one I thought was better than season 2, but season 2 was good, and I really enjoyed it. And part of my enjoyment, and not everybody's gonna get this, but part of my enjoyment is just the Jewish humor.
Right.
Just so much of the culture I grew up with, and the people I know people like that, but I also think the characters are so interesting and benevolent and weird, but in a funny, benevolent kind of way. So like her father is this strange, you'll see in season 2 primarily, he's this strange professor type, but in a funny, benevolent kind of, and the mother too turns out that she has a whole life and that's kind of interesting and fun. So yeah, I mean, I love the relationships. I love the characters. I love the benevolence. I love the music is fabulous. This very light, positive, friendly kind of music from the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
Or maybe even to the 60s. But just, yeah, I found, and then I like that Lenny Bruce shows up all the time in the show, and he has an ongoing role in it. So that one is one I like. What else am I watched? What did I watch on the plane? Yeah, I watched some terrible. I watched some terrible movies.
Yeah, those are easy to find.
Yeah, those are easy. Particularly, I watched a couple of French movies, which were just awful. Oh my God. And one of them looked like it was going to be good. It was like the title was "Let the Sunshine In," and it was Juliette Binoche, who I think is fantastic, and I love her. And I was expecting something that ultimately let the sunshine in. And oh my God, it was depressing and naturalistic and stupid and went nowhere. And I mean, she was brilliant, as she always is. She's just a brilliant actress. But what did I watch on the plane yesterday? I watched something on the plane. I watch, I don't know. I mean, I have my own crazy stuff I watch. I watch Vikings. You know, I'm like on season 5 or 4.
My wife loves those.
Yeah, I mean, I can't recommend it, but I watch it. It's like, yeah, let's go slaughter those British. Yeah, you know. And it's funny because and I must be the only one who does this, but I fast forward through the battle scenes. I find them really boring. Like I like the setup to the battles and I like the right after the battle, but the actual slaughter I find disgusting and boring. So I fast forward those. No, nothing that stands out right now. What did I watched another stupid movie, the one about Asians.
Oh yeah, Rich Asians or whatever.
Asians, something, yeah.
Yeah,
And
that
I
was
thought
kind of-
maybe it'll be like my big something Greek wedding.
Yeah.
Which was funny, which was really, I thought, really hysterically funny, although number 2 was terrible. And it wasn't. It was flat. It was boring. It was stupid.
I agree.
He didn't like anybody. I've got like 4 movies that I've rented that I'm going to watch on my trips now. All of them are foreign. I think all of them are foreign because I couldn't find anything American that seemed worthwhile to watch. And I don't know that the foreign ones are going to be any worthwhile to watch.
We've been watching Mr. Sunshine on your.
Are you enjoying it?
Yeah, it's so. I mean, it's filmed. I mean, just the way it's filmed. There's just the interaction between the characters is amazing. Sometimes it's hard to they talk so fast. The subtitles are just coming by and really quick, but you can pick. You can still follow the.
Yeah, and it's slow, but I think slow is good in this case. And
yeah.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite show in a long, long time.
It's interesting how many foreign films or TV shows are. I mean, I've got a Roma lined up and My Brilliant Friend. I haven't seen those yet, but
I suspect Roma's going to be terrible. But yeah, I think it's going to be terrible because it's very naturalistic. It's pure naturalism. And it's filmed in a naturalistic style, and it's. Yeah, I mean, I'll watch it, but just because see what all the hype is about. But yeah, I'll let people know as they come. But I haven't been impressed by much lately. And Miss Maisel was the last thing I really enjoyed. And I mean, there's a lot of like noir, dark detective stories that you can get on Netflix out of Scandinavia. Scandinavians are very good with like dark. Mystery type things. So there's a bunch of those that I don't have the names, but I would recommend looking into when you're looking for stuff. But they're depressing and they're dark, and
Oh, did you see that the 4th season of the Bridge is out?
No.
The Scandinavian, the
Danish, Swedish.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Supposedly this is the last one, so they wrap everything up.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Watch. Okay, thanks for letting me know. Yeah. Is it on like Netflix or not Netflix?
Hulu.
I'll have to download it from Hulu. Yeah. All right. Okay, let's see. We'll take this. Oh my God, this is year in review. How has Trump done? How has the country done? That's a big question. I mean, I think Trump is awful. I think he denigrates the office of the presidency almost daily. I think the damage he has done to the presidency and to America internationally and domestically, and how we think about presidents and how presidents behave and what one expects from a president. I think that's probably, it'll take a generation to fix. And the damage he's done to the right, primarily to the Republican Party, to the idea of the Republican Party and the right more broadly, the crudeness, I don't think we'll recover. I don't think Republicans will recover for a long, long time. And one of the things I think that the Trump presidency will do is it'll bring about a very long period of leftist dominance. And if it won't be leftist dominance, then it'll be people on the right worse than Trump. Because I think that's the option. Good Republicans, free market Republicans, sane Republicans, I don't think have a chance, for a long time. We'll see if that, my predictions are pretty shaky. We'll see if that comes true, but that's part of the damage. So I think really almost everything Trump did in this last year, and I don't have a list in front of me, has been negative in that sense. The achievements, I mean, I can't remember if tax cuts were this year or in 18 or 17, but yeah, I mean, you keep going back to that, moving the embassy, cool. North Korea is a disaster. and he's going for a second meeting next month, which I think, again, foreign policy-wise, is really, really bad. The whole attitude towards Saudi Arabia, the attitude towards the killing of that, not a particularly good guy, not a guy, but just the way America responded, just the way this administration responded was so pathetic and so obviously in the pocket of the Saudis that it was a capitulation that I think the rest of the world watched and saw. The relationship with Putin. That press conference was in 2018, I think, when he went and had a press conference with Putin and basically complimented Putin while attacking the CIA and the FBI and our own intelligence agencies, right? And it's just a bizarre anti-American press conference. So again, I think everything Trump touches is tainted, ultimately taints the presidency. And then, of course, trade. Trade is a disaster. The negotiations are a disaster. The so-called NAFTA 2.0 is just a rearranging of some trivial stuff. He's done nothing on trade positive. The stuff with China, I think, is a disaster, even if China lands up importing more American stuff in the end. Why is that? The amount of stuff that China imports is not a standard for goodness. The amount of free trade China engages in is good. If they lower tariffs broadly, that would be good. But if they just buy more soybeans from the U.S., that is not good for anything. That's just, you want them to move towards more freedom. And I'm not sure that's going to happen. I don't think they're going to achieve anything on the intellectual property. Again, I've always said, I think the Chinese are going to give Trump what the Chinese would have done anyway. I think what maybe they'll do is they'll accelerate, but whatever movement they were planning to do anyway in the future. Remember, China's been liberalizing for a long, long time and lowering trade barriers for a long, long time and increasing freedom in the economic sphere for a long, long time. Anything they're going to give Trump is something they would have done anyway. So in the meantime, we've suffered through ridiculous trade war, which is harmful to American business, harmful to American economy. And again, from the perspective of how we're perceived in the world, we're now just another statist government that is nationalist and is interested in its narrow economic so-called interests, and not a shining city on the hill that represents freedom and represents anything, right? So if Obama and Trump have done anything, this duo, it's made America, which I think was Obama's goal and Trump's just perspective, made America just another country with no real difference. I think Obama always thought America was just another country. He was against American exceptionalism, and he wanted to make America not a leader but a follower. He wanted to make America just another country, like a European country. He wanted to make America France. And I think basically Trump is bought into, we're just another country, but we're my country. So America first, not because America is exceptional, but because I'm an American. So America first, a kind of shallow form of patriotism and nationalism. So I'm trying to think of positives and I can't. And I'm sure they are specific concrete positives, but they're so overwhelmed by the broad negatives that it's really hard to focus. Again, moving the embassy, there was something else. Getting out of Paris, but that again was done in the first term. Cutting taxes, and I can't sure if that was done the first year or second year. So not much. Shutting down the government over a while. That was the last thing he did in the year. And the first thing he did this year was back off of that. So a disaster either way. All right, Lucas asked, I'm from Germany working in tech and planning to move to the US. If America is no longer exceptional, wow, perfect question, perfect timing. Should I look elsewhere? I certainly think you should look elsewhere, not definitively, but I think you should look at your options. I don't think you should be single-minded. I do think there are places in the world that it might be easier to move to and, valuable to move to. I've talked a lot about the good stuff I think that's happening in Ireland. And there's a lot of tech in Ireland. And for a German, it would be very easy to move to Ireland because they're part of the European Union. And your tax rate would go down significantly. And even on social freedom front, Ireland is becoming much better. They used to ban gay weddings. Now gay marriage is okay in Ireland. Abortion, oh my God. There was a referendum in Ireland and they approved abortion, which is pretty unbelievable. So Ireland has come a long way over the last, I'd say, 20 to 30 years, both in terms of economic freedom and in terms of social freedom. So while culturally there are all kinds of other, I'm sure people will remind me of all the problems that exist in Ireland, but lots of countries have problems. But again, given the ease of movement, Ireland might not be a bad place. Australia and New Zealand would also be on my short list in terms of moving. But at the end of the day, particularly if you're in tech, I don't think you can match the United States. The most exciting companies in the world are here. And the people still, you can't match still the American sense of life, the American sense of respect for productivity and respect for entrepreneurs, and particularly in Silicon Valley and particularly in these kind of regions where there is entrepreneurship. They love what they do. They work hard. They admire people who are successful. They admire good programmers or good whatever. And that environment, in spite of them being lefties, that environment is and Glenn is an entrepreneur in biotech, and I think he will back me up on this. I mean, it's still an exciting place to be. It's still an amazing place to be able to work is in the high-tech space in the US. And I don't think it's matched by any other country in the world. So particularly in high-tech, I still think you should put the United States as number one. But you have to recognize it's going to be hard to get here. H-1Bs, they're cutting back on those. They're making it more difficult. It's harder for companies to hire. And they might not renew them in the future. There's a huge backlash against H-1Bs. So it's going to be more difficult than, let's say, going to Ireland. Am I identifying kind of startup culture or technology culture, right, Glenn?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's, the money's there, the venture capital, they're still willing to take the risk and, support, some cutting edge stuff, both in biotech. And I'm not as familiar with, computer technology, but yeah, it's all still there.
I mean, you've got the venture capitalists, you've got the money, you've got some of the smartest people in the world running these companies and working for these companies. And you've got a whole infrastructure. So if you come to a place like Silicon Valley, if you start with one company, you can easily change, you can move up, you can bounce around and without it hurting you, not like in the old days, but you can actually try to find the best niche, the best place for you. It's a whole ecosystem, both in the biotech space and in the computer space. I mean, one of the things that keeps California afloat, in spite of its crazy politics, is the fact that it's still one of the greatest places to work if you're in the technology, broadly in the technology innovative space.
And I don't think it's just Silicon Valley. Obviously, everybody focuses on that, but here to support Denver, there's a lot of tech here. Boston, there's a lot of biotech. Seattle,
Austin, Texas, San Diego.
Yeah, so it's spreading to other areas.
Seattle's pretty amazing. Austin's pretty amazing, and a great place to live, and a much cheaper place to live than California. So when you look at the U.S., it makes sense to look broadly. Okay, Jennifer.
Do you think ever, if you're in the military, I know you're supposed to follow the rules and that's part of how it works, but would it ever be the right thing to do not to follow the rules? Would it be worth it ever?
Yes, absolutely. I think if you find the orders to be a violation of morality, and of your principles, then I think you should disobey and go to jail and do what, you suffer the consequences for that. If you think your commanding officer is a nutcase, is insane, is I don't know, there are all kinds of ways, mechanisms within the military to question it. But in the battlefield, yes, there are absolutely occasions where you should say no to a commanding officer because they're nuts, or they're asking you to do something immoral. If you go into a village somewhere and the commanding officer says, kill all the women and children, it's like, no. And too many soldiers in places like Vietnam, and I think probably in the Middle East, have said yes. Now, I don't think it happens as much today because today they travel with lawyers and stuff like that. But in battle, it's very hard to say no. And if your comrades, the people in your group are going to do it, you standing out, I mean, there are real consequences to that. It takes a lot of courage to say no. But yes, I definitely think that there are lots of occasions where you should say you should say no to a commanding officer. And that's what you want. You want an army of volunteers, but an army of moral individuals who understand what their job is, but also understand that where crossing a line is and is inappropriate.
Thank you.
All right, Glenn.
Are you? What are your thoughts on the work of Kahneman and Tversky? Have you followed them at all? I mean, they are Israeli, so I assume that you were exposed to them.
A little bit, and I wasn't exposed to them in Israel because they became big names after I left Israel already.
Yeah.
And I studied finance, and they really became big after I was out of school already. So they became big in the 90s and in the early 2000s.
Mhm.
But this is the behavioral economics kind of school where they talk a lot about cognitive biases that we have and mistakes that it seems people behave in predictably irrational ways, that they behave irrationally, consistently, and predictably. And I think a lot of it's very interesting work, and the right approach to it should be, let's study this so we could correct it. Let's study it so we don't make the mistakes, right? So these are cognitive mistakes. And I think they are. And I think these kind of cognitive mistakes, we have an inclination to make them. Now, I don't completely understand how we have that inclination, what that inclination constitutes, but it probably has to do with some tendencies towards risk-taking or some tendencies towards other things. I mean, the whole area of consciousness and what consciousness involves and what is programmed and what is not. What is the difference between an idea, an emotion, a sensation? Those are fairly easy. But then when you get to inclination and the number of these kind of terms, that it's hard to tell, and it's hard to tell the causal relationships.
Right.
So I think it's there. We still don't have a good explanation for why. And it's also true that it's there for a majority, which doesn't mean that it's true for everybody. So it could be that it's the consequence of a bad education system. I mean, Kahneman and those guys say, no, it's built in. The biases are built into our cognition. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just bad education. How come not everybody's biased, right? It's just a bell curve. Some people are more biased than others, and some people are not biased at all. They're really rational. So if we trained kids at a very young age in thinking, in really actually in using reason and using their mind and being and challenging authority and challenging the worldview and really thinking out of the box, would we still have the same phenomena? I doubt it. So I think it's more of what we've automatized, and we've automatized these biases because they are consistent with something in our educational system. And you'd have to be an expert to go in there and figure out exactly what it is.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I suspect. But as observations about the way people behave in the world we are today, as not normative, but as just observational, not the way things should be, but how they are, I think they're fairly accurate. I think the experiments make sense and they reflect what's really going on. And it's useful to read their stuff because you discover maybe your own biases and can fix them and be a better thinker as a consequence.
Right. Yeah.
All right, we got one more question around Trump, and then what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to run through the super chat question to make sure I get all of them, and then I think we're going to call it a day because it's already an hour and a half. Okay, this is, if Trump fires Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, what will follow? And I assume this was asked a while ago when this was still in the cards. It could still return. I mean, I think there'd be chaos. I think there'd be complete chaos. I mean, I think that if the president of the United States basically said there is no independent Federal Reserve anymore and went ahead and fired him, it's only really happened once, I think, and it wasn't formally a firing, but the president basically got the chairman of the Federal Reserve to resign. But it was unequivocal, and nobody questioned the fact that the chairman of the Federal Reserve was awful. That was, I think, Arthur Burns in the 1970s, and he was replaced by Paul Volcker, who then went ahead and cleaned up the Federal Reserve and cleaned up the U.S. economy to a large extent. And no, I mean, people forget this, but another of the great things that Jimmy Carter did, he did a few great things. But one of them was that he appointed Volcker and he got rid of Burns. And I think it was Arthur Burns. But everybody thought he should go. It wasn't just the president of the United States. It was unanimous. Here, the markets don't want Powell to go right now. And the markets would view this as a real infringement on the Federal Reserve, infringement on its independence. And I think the markets would take a significant hit and a permanent hit, a hit that would like say, okay, if American markets were always valued, everything else held constant, higher than European markets and other countries' markets because of the rule of law, and because we have a Fed that we can trust, and because the Fed has kept inflation under control for the last 40 years, and 30 years or whatever, and so on, that trust in the Fed would diminish dramatically, and that there would be a discount on all financial assets as a consequence. So it would be a really bad thing, even though I'm not a fan of Jerome Powell's. But then I'm not a fan of the Fed's. So I'm not a fan of any of its possible chairmen. All right, let's do these super chat questions quickly. Why did Rourke and Wynand admire each other so strongly, despite their radically different lifestyles? Was their friendship doomed from the start? I mean, that's a great question, and it's a great question. You know, it's even a great question in the context of the landscape we live in today. So why did they admire each other so much? Because they were giants. They were amazing human beings who had achieved amazing stuff. They were clearly, what they admired each other is their productive genius, even though Wynand's productive genius had been distorted into doing stuff that was basically, at the end of the day, unproductive. But he could do things on a grand scale. He could muster the resources out there to change the world in a way that Rourke admired, the way that Ayn Rand admired. And of course, Wynand admired Rourke even more because Rourke could do that and never compromised. Wynand did compromise. So they admired the productive genius in each other, right? And this is relevant to the world we live in today, because I get so much harassment for saying such positive things about the CEOs of tech companies. But I love the CEOs of tech companies, right? I mean, I admire them. I have amazing respect for them. Not because of their politics. Their politics suck. But then 99% of the peoples on Earth's politics suck. But they're productive geniuses. They're at least as good as Wynand, if not better than Wynand, because they're not, well, some of them are, you could think of even, where Facebook is heading, you could think of a Zuckerberg as a Wynand, right? But you've got to admire what they have done, what they have achieved. The sheer genius of managing a company with tens of thousands of employees and managing it well, managing it in a creative way. The ability to innovate, to bring in new technologies, to do something nobody else has ever done. Wow, that is so admirable. Admirable. Yeah, anyway, whatever the word is. That you gotta respect them, and you gotta have a positive view of them. And this is why Rourke had respect for Wynand, in spite of what Wynand did. Even when Wynand, in a sense, stabbed him in the back, just like these guys stab us in the back by articulating a leftist philosophy. Now, was the friendship doomed from start? Yeah, I think at the end of the day, yes, it was, because at the end of the day, Wynand was doomed to stab Rourke in the back. At the end of the day, Wynand psychologically could not stay friends with Rourke because Rourke was a slap in his face. Every time he saw Rourke, Rourke represented what he could and should have been, and he knew it. So the reason at the end of the book, he invites Rourke, he says, build me this building, do all this stuff, but I never want to see you again, is because the sight of Rourke is a symbol to Wynand of his moral failure. And nobody can handle that. It's not that Wynand couldn't handle that. Nobody can handle that. So in that sense, Yes, the friendship was doomed to failure. Okay. Does Klaus von Stauffenberg deserve his status as a hero despite his own illiberal and anti-Semitic views? What do you think of the Valkyr? So is this the pilot who shot down a lot of airplanes? Who's Klaus von Stauffenberg? I'm showing my ignorance of history here. So, Avid, if you're on there, just fill me in there, and I'll try to comment. Do you know Glenn? Do you know Jennifer?
No.
All right. Sam asks, saw the video of Chinese company using toilet paper dispensers with face recognition to ration because people use too much to steal them. Good tech or bad tech? I mean, it's awful. But it's not the tech that's awful. The tech is great. It's the use that people are putting this. And look, the thing with China is that having toilet paper is an achievement, even today. One of the reasons, you know, I hesitate to go back to China, particularly to rural China, where I've toured a lot and I've been to a lot of different places in China. And generally, I like China a lot, and I find China fascinating, and I find the Chinese people fascinating. Toilets are a real problem in China. One, because they never have toilet paper there. Maybe because people steal them. Maybe that mentality is still there from the times where toilet paper was expensive and didn't exist. Or partially because they don't put them out, so you have to travel with toilet paper. You have to travel with wipes or something. And a lot of the toilets don't have toilets. They have just holes in the ground, and you're going into a pit, and it stinks, and it's disgusting, and it's filthy, and it's awful, right? So public toilets are a big reason why, there's certain parts of China which are difficult to travel in, and you want to stay in the best hotel available, and you want to, anyway. So the whole thing of toilet paper and toilets is a sensitive issue in China. I think this technology is pretty disgusting, but I've never seen it in all my travels in China. I've never seen face recognition technology on toilet paper dispensers. So maybe this was a cute kind of one of those videos for the 3 toilets in all of China who have this, and somebody made a viral video over it, but it's not really a thing or a phenomena in China. All right, so Avid has not come back and told me who Klaus von whatever is. So I'm going to do this for a second. Use Google. Okay. Was a German army officer. He was a count, hereditary noble title, and he took part in the attack on Poland, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, and the Tunisian campaign during World War II. Now, why is he considered a hero? Because Strasbourg was one of the leading members of the failed. Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think he should be a hero. I mean, the guy was one of Hitler's inner circle, and when he realized that we're losing the war, he wanted to kill Hitler. You're going to make him a hero? I mean, that's the Valkyrs. They're the ones who went against Hitler in 1944 and tried to assassinate him. A little too late. The only people who should consider heroes are people who try to assassinate Hitler pre-39, or let's say by 40. If you were with Hitler through 1940, you're scum, you're immoral, you're evil. You know, the fact that you try to assassinate Hitler puts you, instead of on the, 9th rung of hell, puts you on the 8th rung of hell, but you're still in hell. There's nothing heroic, about it, given what you do. So you're slightly trying to redeem yourself. Okay. But remember, by 44, Germany was losing the war. And that's why they did it. They didn't do it because they cared about the Holocaust, because that was going on for a while. They didn't do it because they suddenly just thought that Nazism was bad. They primarily did it because of their love of Germany, and Germany was going to lose a war. Well, to hell with that. So no heroes there. They're just not as evil as the others. And I did see that movie Valkyr. And yeah, I mean, there's a heroism involved in a sense. They overcome obstacles and they risk their lives in order to achieve this. But what they were trying to achieve is not good enough to make them heroes at all. At all. All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for the support. Thanks for being here today and asking good questions. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters and those who asked the questions and participated in the poll to figure out which ones I would answer. Thank you for all the super chat entrants. And I encourage all of you who would like to support the show, want to see the show continue to grow and to succeed, to go to Patreon. And oh, here's a quick question. They put $5 on it. Under-objectivism is exploiting the poor, wrong or immoral. Exploiting the poor in terms of exploitation, real exploitation, is certainly immoral. And if you're doing it through physical force, it's also illegal. But yes, exploiting somebody, knowingly causing somebody to lose is immoral in objectivism. What you want is to create win-win relationships in objectivism. All right. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share. And don't forget to support the show. Bye. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Ron.